Hey guys, Richard Petty had a big day on July the 2nd, celebrating his 86th birthday. We figured that's a perfect opportunity to share with you one of our favorite memories of King Richard. Richard Petty is the undisputed king of stock car racing. For 3 generations, he's been one of the most recognizable faces in all motorsports. Everybody knows King Richard. Now, along that same line, a guy from his same generation, A.J. Foyt, one of the most badass racers in the history of the planet, is also equally recognizable. So to interview one of those guys is memorable. To interview both at the same time is a really special moment. And I wanted here today to tell you all about how that happened for me in 2007. Now, from 2004 to 2010, I served as a pit reporter at the Indianapolis 500 on the IMS Radio network. Now, this was a really memorable time in my career, being able to be a part of covering the Indianapolis 500, the most prestigious, historic race in all the world, was a special privilege. But even more than that, to work with the people at IMS Radio, I mean, this was an all-star cast of people. Wally Levitt was the executive who ran the network. Mike King was the anchor of the broadcast. Mark Janes was a part of it. He's now the anchor. Chris Pollock, an engineer who now heads up the network after Wally's retirement. And an amazing cast of fellow broadcasters. Bob Jenkins, Donald Davidson, Chris Denari, Jake Query, Jerry Baker. These were people that they're legends in my eyes, and I tried to learn from those people as I work with them on the network. So each time we covered the 500, we started the day with a production meeting early in the morning where Wally would go over kind of the general direction of today's broadcast, the pre-race show, the race, and then Mike King would go over a list of elements that we really wanted to try to get in the pre-race show. And on this day in 2007, in the meeting, Mike started down his list, and they were celebrating A.J. Foyt's 40th anniversary of his win at the 500 in 1977. And so Mike said, hey, listen, we want to get a word with A.J. If you pit reporters see him out on pit lane in the pre-race, try to get him so we can get him on the show. So a little further down the line, Mike also said, hey, STP is bringing Richard Petty to the 500 today, and if you guys see Richard, we really want to hear from Petty in the pre-race. So the meeting wrapped up and I got dressed. We wore a fire suit back at that time to be on pit lane, and I walked down and began making my rounds looking for somebody to interview. Now I could hear the program in my ear. Also had a talk back, which allowed me to communicate with my producers and the guys in the tower. One of the first people I saw was A.J. Foyt. Now, he was directing a couple crew guys, getting some equipment in their pit, and I approached him. And as anybody in my line of work knows, with A.J., you never really know what you're going to get. Might be the teddy bear, might be the grizzly bear. If at that moment A.J. doesn't feel like he needs to be talking to you, he's going to make that very clear to you right away. But on the flip side, he can also be very accommodating. His interviews are always interesting. For example, I think it was 2010 or so, Road and Track magazine called, asked if I would write a feature story about A.J. for their magazine. So they made the arrangements and flew me to Texas, and man, A.J. could not have been more accommodating that day. It was terrific. Great interview. And then I ended up spending the greater part of the day just hanging out with A.J. We went across the street and got tacos, sat in his truck and talked for a while. Fantastic day. So even though he's grumpy sometimes, always an interesting interview. But as I approached A.J. there on pit lane that morning, I had my doubts. He was in race mode, and I said to him, hey, A.J., would you have a minute to talk to us on the radio? And he kind of hesitated and kind of glared at me for a minute and said, okay, I guess so. And I said, well, now, hang with me. It'll take a minute before they come to us for the interview. And he said something like, well, you know, hurry up. I'm busy. I can't wait all day. So I got on my talk back and told my producer, Brian Livingston, hey, I've got A.J. Foyt. If you can come to me, please come as quickly as you can because I can't hold him very long. And Brian said, okay, we're in a pre-recorded piece right now we can't get out of. As soon as that finishes, we'll come down to you. So try to hold on to him. So it's one of those moments where 30 seconds feels like 30 minutes. And so I thought, yeah, maybe some small talk. So I looked at A.J. and said something inane like, looks like it's a good day for it. And he gave me one of those looks. He didn't say anything, but he gave me one of those looks like, don't be a pain in the ass. Well, right about that moment, we heard some sort of a commotion, like a din, just off to our left, and A.J. both instinctively turned and looked that direction. Here comes Richard Petty and his entourage, surrounded by people, photographers, making his way up pit lane. Well, about the moment we saw him, he saw us. Most notably, he saw A.J. and immediately did one of those pivots where he came straight toward us, and he had on this grin of his that looks like it's 2 feet wide. And when he reached A.J., they shook hands, and A.J.'s demeanor changed immediately. He was happy. This was clearly two old friends who were genuinely glad to see each other. And this was all just happening in real time, and I was just amazed at what's going on here. So I kind of got a hold of Richard's shirt sleeve and said, Richard, I'm about to talk to A.J. on the radio. Would you talk to us too? And he just smiled and said, well, yeah, I'll talk to you, sure. So I got on my talk back and said to Brian, hey, I've got Richard Petty and A.J. Foyt, but you got to come to me right away. And Brian said, kind of confused, Dave, who do you have? Do you have A.J. or do you have Richard Petty? And Mike King, the anchor, he got on as well and said, Dave, who are you with? Are you with Foyt or are you with Petty? And I said, guys, I'm with both of them, but you've got to get down to me right now because I can't hold them very long. And Mike said, okay, just hang with him. Try to hold on to him. We're almost out of this recorded piece. So I managed to hold on. They chatted for a minute, and then I could hear in program that piece wrapped up, and then Mike made the throw down to me. Let's have a listen to that interview, IMS 2007.
Could become a legend here at the Speedway with this great comeback. Talk about legends. Dave Argabright, you've caught up with not one, but two of them, A.J. Foyt and Richard Petty.
What a moment standing out here on pit lane with A.J. Foyt. Richard Petty walks up. They have a great conversation. Richard, welcome to Indianapolis in the 500.
Yeah, man, I finally got to come up here. We're usually doing racing at 600. I don't get to come for the big race, so John Andretti invited me up here, so I come up, and first thing I do is find Foyt. I got to argue with him a little bit,
Well, that's a good thing to argue a little bit. A.J., we saw you in that pace car a minute ago. Looked like it brought back some great memories.
Well, it's kind of like Richard says, when you ride in a car that when you won the fourth time here, it makes you bring back a lot of memories, make you feel awful good because he rode in them pace cars. He won an awful lot, and it's nice to get back and know at one time you did win.
Yeah, and you two guys used to race quite a lot together. I mean, Daytona 500, all that. How often did you race against A.J.?
He'd come down and aggravate us for 4 or 5 races a year, come to Daytona a couple of times and a couple of others, maybe Charlotte or something when they wasn't running up here. And, he didn't get in the way that much. He done a pretty good job, We took care of him pretty good.
Did you aggravate him?
Had a lot of fun. The only thing I was mad at him, he never would come run our little bitty doodlebug cars. He always kept bringing me out of my little cars to them big cars.
Right. The thing had fenders on it. He'd knock you with the fenders. I should have run him with open wheel cars because he wouldn't hit people with open wheel,
Could he have done all right in these cars?
Oh, I'm quite sure he could have. If you're a winner, you're always a winner wherever you go. And just the records speak for themselves, for him and me both. We've won about in everything we ever did, so there's no reason why he wouldn't have won in open wheel cars.
A lot of legends here, but when these two get together, the whole ground shakes. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. See y'all later.
Boy, that is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity there, Dave Argabright, as he wrangled both.
Man, what a moment, what a memory. And once again, in a stroke of great luck, thank goodness, my friend Chris Jones of IMS Photo and his camera just happened to be on the scene at that moment, and he recorded those images that we just saw a moment ago. Yet another stroke of good luck, good fortune, whatever. Incidentally, a couple of years after this interview, Wally Levitt called me and said, hey Dave, we're remodeling our offices over here at the network, and we're getting rid of some pictures that were hanging on the wall, and you're in one of the pictures, and I thought you might want to have that. And I said, well, yeah, Wally, I appreciate that. By the way, what is the picture? He said, well, it's a picture of you interviewing A.J. Foyt and Richard Petty. And I said, yeah, Wally, I'm sure I will want that picture. I will definitely want that picture. And for about 15 years, that thing is hung in my office. It's been the greatest conversation piece of all time, because every visitor notices that picture and says, hey, that's Richard Petty and A.J. Foyt. Now, as I said earlier, Richard Petty is the king of stock car racing, and it isn't just his statistics that make that so. Nobody was a better people person than Richard Petty. Even the people who cheered against him still had a huge amount of respect for this guy and just the way he carried himself. And he shaped a lot of people, me included. About 30 years ago or more, when I was just starting my career, I heard him say in an interview that the easiest thing in the world is being nice to people. And I never forgot that and tried to always keep it in mind in dealing with people down through the years. And a couple of years ago at PRI in Indianapolis, I ran into Richard, and I hadn't seen him for a long time. And as he's shaking my hand, I said, hey, I just want to share with you that something you said 30 years ago, the easiest thing in the world is being nice to people, stuck with me. That served me pretty well all these years. And I want you to know, Richard, I appreciate you, and I appreciate what you said and how good an influence it was on me. And as we shook hands, he squeezed my hand and in that grin of his, and he said, thanks, man, that's pretty good. Well, that is pretty good. Everything about Richard Petty is pretty good. So Richard, I hope you had a great birthday. I hope it was a fantastic day. Thank you for giving me a great memory of being able to interact with you all those years ago. And to all of you watching, thank you, and that's all for today.